I'm sure you've all seen the commercials asking you to support a child in Africa for less than $1 a day. Or the various Facebook memes poking fun at third world problems. But really, what do we know about these problems that plague Africa? Or the countries that are dealing with them? Similarly, we all know that the United States was involved in armed conflicts with Afghanistan and Iraq. But do we really know what happened there? The answer is no, we don't know. We are constantly exposed to so much information that none of it matters to us or surprises us for too long. An exception to this, for us New Yorkers, was 9/11. This mattered to us more than it did to any other American because we saw what happened and know people who died or know people who lost loved ones. There's an emotion attached to it, and that's why we not only know 9/11, but why we truly understand 9/11. Now, the same can be said about history. History books are packed with a multitude of information in the form of dates, facts, and statistics. They've also been proven to be a great sleeping aid. No, really. It's amazing the number of times I've fallen asleep the minute I started reading my history textbook. But shouldn't history, the grand narrative of our species over centuries, interest us? In order to connect with or understand something, there has to be some form of empathy involved. But empathy is an emotional act. And history doesn't leave any space for emotions, the intangible yet crucial components of the human condition. By not being able to empathize with history, we are separated from it, from our own story. Let me give you an example. If someone were to ask me about the Holocaust when I was in middle school, I would say it was when 6 million Jewish people were killed during World War II. I'm sure many of you would agree that this is true. But a few years later, I read Night by Elie Wiesel, a memoir relating Wiesel's experiences as a former inmate at a Nazi concentration camp. I read about the brutalities he underwent and the pain he suffered. I read about what he thought and what he felt. By merging emotional experience with historical events, Wiesel gave me a whole picture of the Holocaust, and I could connect with him in a way I could never connect with any history textbook. That's when I stopped knowing about the Holocaust and truly understood the Holocaust. Unfortunately, the Holocaust is only one of the many mass genocides that taint our history. In 1947, India was divided into the Secular Republic of India and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. This was something I'd heard about often from my parents being of Indian descent, but I never really thought much of it. That was until my cousin Rashmi and I were talking, and she told me that our grandfather had once been hit by a sword. Now, as a nerdy 12-year-old genealogist, this intrigued me to say the least. But that night, I saw my oldest aunt Kanta, and I asked her to tell me the story of what had happened. I still remember sitting in her apartment, fiercely jotting down everything she had said, watching her face reanimate with the same emotions she felt all those years ago. What is now history is for her still a story, and it could never be condensed into a few events and a handful of statistics. When she was 10 years old, my family, her family, were living in what is now Pakistan. They were forcibly removed from their homes because they were Hindu, and Pakistan was to become a Muslim state. Now, the same was happening across the border, where Hindus were expelling Muslims into Pakistan. My grandfather had been attacked by a rioting mob when he had tried to defend his daughters from being abducted and probably raped. And my grandmother was 8 months pregnant and had to give birth en route to the new India in the middle of nowhere during a monsoon, only to lose her firstborn son when she reached India. My great aunt developed tuberculosis and her son contracted pneumonia. Both died. This is when I personally understood the partition, because I could empathize with it, because it connected with me, with my family, with my heritage. So of course, when I got to my 10th grade world history class, I was excited to learn about this topic. But all that was written about it was that India gained its independence and was divided. That's all. So, of course, there are various history textbooks and other historical records dedicated solely to this event, but they relate the economic and political realities of the division. The emotion gets lost once again. The knowledge is preserved, but the understanding is stripped away. In order to remedy this, I traveled to India this past summer, thanks to the Rosen Fellowship at Brooklyn College, and interviewed survivors of the partition on their experiences. I recorded what I like to call raw history and learned things that have not yet made their way into any other source. Things that will touch you, surprise you, and haunt you. Let's hear one of these.
जब पाकिस्तान बना था हम छोटे छोटे से आ रहे थे ना तो रास्ते के अंदर ना एक बुढ़िया देखी मैंने वो देखी तो सभी चलते जा रहे हैं तो वहाँ कोई बुढ़िया ना धीरे धीरे दलदल थी वो मुझे बाद में पता चला जब मेरे को बच्चा थी मेरे को समझ में आया कि ये नीचे नीचे क्यों जा रही है सारे बोले आगे मत जाओ तुम भी इसके नीचे चले जाओगे तो वो बुढ़िया नीचे नीचे जा रही कहती मुझे बचाओ हेल्प करो मदद करो हेल्प करो तो वो बेचारी धीरे धीरे कहने लगे कोई मदद ना करना ये तो जा ही रही है हम लोग भी इसमें चले जाएंगे ये यहाँ पे दलदल है वो बेचारी धीरे धीरे करते वो चिल्लाती रही हम लोगों को तो सब कहते भागो मैंने देखती रही उसके पीछे मुड़ के धीरे धीरे करके वो उसके नीचे चली गई दलदल में बहुत मन खराब हुआ मेरा देख के उसको
That's history. Stories in any form, whether told or written, are able to make people laugh and cry and empathize with the characters within them. Traditional historical records, on the other hand, rarely have the same empathetic effect. Think about it. I'm sure you've seen your friends show emotion when they're reading their favorite books like Harry Potter or 50 Shades of Grey. But who have you seen showing any emotion while reading a history textbook, except maybe boredom? In my history and creative writing classes, I'm often taught opposing ideals. In my history classes, I'm taught to present the facts and observe events analytically. While in my creative writing classes, I'm taught to tell the story through the craft of writing. One stresses telling, while the other stresses showing. Yet, I never understood why the two were so different. Aren't they both trying to tell stories? It is the job of historians and educators alike to promote historical empathy. And it is our job to expose ourselves to non-traditional sources, like memoirs and historical fiction, in order to reconnect with the grand narrative. Let me show you the difference it can make. In a contemporaneous article from Life magazine, photographer Margaret Bourke-White wrote, "The Indian earth trembled with the tread of millions of shuffling feet, and the Indian air, heavy with the smell of death, still echoed the screams of dying. In 9 weeks of freedom, the new nations of India and Pakistan had gone through a bloody slaughter that took 100,000 lives and from which 5 million fled in history's greatest mass migration." Now compare this with the vignette I wrote based on one of the stories I recorded this summer. Somewhere between India and Pakistan, beneath blood-red soil, lies a woman. She had once told me red is a holy color, and now she was drenched in it. She held on tightly to her scarf, dripping with red. She mouthed a word, son. Her silvery hair was a wreck, and her eyes were empty. Red is a holy color. It leaves a hole in you. I had seen them do it, right in front of her, 2 slow slashes with a curved sword and a kick to the head. Then they threw salt on his wounds, making him writhe like a tortured dog. He bled, and he bled red. She had jumped on top of him. The red had consumed the white of her chiffon scarf, like a monsoon drenches the fields, instantaneously. I don't think she would have ever gotten up if they hadn't dragged her away. And now she plodded lazily through the torrential rain, leaving behind a trail of red that dissipated slowly into the brown of the mud, never completely disappearing. And slowly, she too began to fall into the mud, the brown feeding on the red. She was falling. She was drowning. Help, help, save me, my son. They ignored her and kept on walking. There's nothing to see here. And now, somewhere between India and Pakistan, lies a woman beneath blood-red soil. Now tell me, which one hit you more? As Tim O'Brien said, sometimes story truth is truer than happening truth. It is time to link the gap between knowing and understanding. It is time we put the story back in history. Thank you.